fit a lot into 55 minutes. So without further ado, I might hand over to Laura, if that's okay.
Great. Thanks a million, Shane. So we are so delighted to be here. This is something that we, both Elspie and myself, are actually on the hybrid working task force from Human Capital. So this is something that we're talking quite a lot about, and we're seeing huge moves in the market. So this is a really interesting topic for us to kind of chat through with you. If you have any questions or anything, please just pop them in the chat box, and we'll refer back to them. So Elspie, if you can click over to the next slide, please. Great. So when we talk about hybrid working, we're really talking about teams splitting their time between working in an office and working remotely from either their home or another location. And hybrid really isn't a new model. And actually, personally, over the last 5 years, since I started working in Deloitte, the majority of my projects have actually been managed as hybrid projects. And COVID has really accelerated the adoption, or the widespread adoption, of hybrid due to this great success of people working remotely over the last year. And you can see now just how everyone's focus points are really moving into how can we support and drive high performance in a hybrid working environment. Great, thank you. So organizations all over the world are considering going hybrid. And in fact, what we're seeing is about 68% of our clients are leaning towards this hybrid working model. And everyone really is trying to figure out what works for their business at the moment. And it's not going to be this one size fits all approach. We're constantly seeing moves in the market. So initial bold statements from large companies saying they're either fully going to return to the office or they're going to work remotely have really been retracted over the last couple of months, and everyone seems to be moving towards that kind of middle point of a hybrid working model. Organizations are kind of facing challenges in meeting individual needs. So you can see there that 53% of our clients are going for an employer-directed model, while only 15% are going for a workforce-directed model. But what we're seeing is companies are facing issues when the employee sentiment is not taken into account. And the move to hybrid really needs to focus on this co-creation with your teams and kind of figuring out what works best from the business point of view, but also from what is your employees' needs at this point in time. So we're seeing as well that hybrid has benefits from the organization. So from cost savings on real estate and the availability of a wider talent pool. But it also benefits the employees through increased productivity, satisfaction, and well-being. And we're hoping that over time it'll contribute to a reduced turnover. But that being said, kind of some of the big concerns center around the human elements of hybrid working and how to maintain that corporate culture in this new model is one of those coming up. So you can see down at the bottom right-hand side, 32% are saying that maintaining a culture is a concern, and also 19% are saying collaborating effectively is also a concern of theirs. So that's really why we arrived at today's session, focusing on both culture and collaboration. And as Shane was saying, we're going to share some of the insights of what we're seeing in the market. We'll give you some tips to take back to your own organizations. And really, we want to have this open discussion on how or what challenges you're seeing and how you plan on managing those within your own organization. So just before we get started, we might actually run a quick poll. So this is Mentimeter. If you wouldn't mind either using your laptop or opening your phone and just going into menti.com and then just popping in the code. So it'll actually look a little bit like this. So the code is 17605248. You should get a screen like this. And the question, what we're asking is, what work model will your organization adopt going forward? So is your organization planning on going fully remote, hybrid, office-based, or you haven't decided yet? Just give everyone a few minutes. No surprises. Hybrid is coming out massively on top. Great, we'll just give it another 1 minute or two. So what this is telling me really is that our 68%, or the research where we said that 68% of our clients are going hybrid, is probably, if we repeated that now, I would actually expect that number to be a little bit higher. Great, as we might pop back to the main screen. Thank you. So from a culture and belonging perspective, two of the key questions that are cropping up across many of our clients are, how do we create a sense of belonging for staff when they're not co-located? And how do we ignite the desired culture and behaviours for our people in this hybrid model? And we're seeing these questions replicated in our conversations, but also in the research and the trends that we're seeing. So 40% of respondents had concerns about a loss of workplace culture in a hybrid work environment. And almost shockingly, like 41% of the global workforce is considering leaving their current employer within the next year. So what's been dubbed as the Great Resignation of 2021, COVID has really given people the opportunity to rethink their careers, rethink their values, and figure out what is working and what isn't working for them. But on the flip side of that, we're seeing that companies with a really strong sense of belonging, a really positive culture where people feel engaged, aren't included in that 41%. And this is something like this sense of belonging has been something that we're seeing growing in popularity, and it was in our 2020 Global Human Capital Trends report as well. The other thing that's worth noting is the pandemic hasn't impacted everyone equally. So we're seeing that women have been impacted more than men. So in a global survey of 5,000 women, which was conducted across 10 countries, our findings indicate that gender inequality in the workplace has kind of regressed during the pandemic. But on a more positive note, I suppose, the findings have also demonstrated the vital role that employers can play in reversing that trend. So over half of the women surveyed said that they felt less optimistic about their career prospects today, and 57% said that they planned on leaving their job within the next 2 years. Whereas on the flip side of that is when women felt or they experienced a truly respectful and inclusive practice, that number was it was much lower. And they also reported feeling more engaged, more productive, and more loyal. So what does a culture of belonging actually look like? It's really feeling comfortable in work. So being respected and treated fairly by your peers and your leaders. It's building meaningful relationships with your coworkers and feeling connected to the organization's goals. And it's creating this sense of purpose and contribution to meaningful outcomes. I hope it wasn't too bad that somebody's just leaving. And then we might just move on to the next slide. Elsie, please. So how can you cultivate comfort, connection, and collaboration? So firstly, and we see this kind of in three different ways. Firstly, it's through your organization culture. So through your values, your beliefs, and your norms. It's establishing flexible working as the norm and ensuring that your leaders are role modeling these behaviors. So if your leaders are saying that we're moving towards a hybrid work environment and people can choose X number of days in the office, but that leader is being in the office 5 days a week, it's going to make it really difficult for people to adopt that flexible working environment. And that kind of leads us on to our second point of leader behavior is key. And it's creating that sense of psychological safety. So having an open and honest conversation, actively seeking to understand and clarify what individuals need to feel like they belong and kind of co-create and adapt different solutions that work for that team. It's really having conversations that are centered around empathy and compassion, because moving to a hybrid work environment, it's not going to be as easy as in 2020 when it was that shift from working from the office to working from home. This is going to be an iterative approach. And then really it's around creating those personal relationships, the informal connections into work, So including social time in your meetings, sharing stories, and bringing that kind of humanity back into our meetings. So what we have here is kind of where to start. So define your cultural must-haves. So what does comfort look like for your teams? What does connection and contribution look like? Target the willing. So you might have heard of change champions. So bring the people who are already bought in on board and help them talk to give them the tools that they need to talk to their peers and kind of create that movement on a more informal level. Define the minimal viable changes and the quick wins. You don't need to change absolutely everything in one go. Take it from like a pilot approach, start small and build it out, and it will be iterative. Some things are going to work and some things won't, but having those open and honest conversations to say, we're going to try this and we're going to work together to create something that suits both the business and our people, I think that helps people kind of come on board. Inspire through results and stories. So have people share what's working for them and what's not working for them. Because if there's some challenges that somebody is facing and it's not being spoken about, we might see some like that might resonate with somebody else. And then we can actually we can instill different changes as we kind of bring those on board and then continue to evolve and learn. Elsie, if we can just go to the next slide, please. So what we have here is a quick case study. These are some key trends that we're seeing across the market. And really what we want to do is to have, I suppose, a common organization that we can all discuss. If you want to bring in learnings from your own organization, you're more than welcome to do so. So just at a high level, this is organization XYZ. It's a financial services company of approximately 800 people. They're like us all, their entire workforce has worked remotely over the last 18 months. But in the last 3 months, they've lost 15% of their workforce, and of which 80% of those were women. And of their current workforce, 35% of them have been hired within the last year, and they're expecting an additional headcount of 50 people before the end of 2021. So they plan on starting a hybrid working model from October 1st, and Mondays and Fridays will be remote, whereas Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will be on site, where people have the choice of choosing which day suits them. So if you wouldn't mind going back to Menti, and we have a couple of questions on that. So the first question is, what challenges do you think organization XYZ will face? I might take that one at a time. So this is a free text box if you want to just pop in anything, or if you find it easier just to unmute yourself and we can start chatting it out, whatever works. Absolutely, building a new culture for new people joining.
Just out of curiosity, if with organizations being remote for the last almost year and a half, and it's human nature to have habits, and life moves on, and people are now are accustomed to be at home all the time. Do you see with companies trying to enforce people coming back to the office as a challenge may result in people quitting because some people, their schedule now involves taking kids to school or doing X, Y, and Z, and suddenly there's everything's changed. Just curious how you see companies doing that.
I think one of the main trends that we're seeing across the workforce is people want flexibility, and that if people aren't getting that flexibility, they're willing to move. So that is something that organizations, if they want to keep their staff, will need to adopt a more flexible approach.
We're seeing also flexibility as a key benefit that organizations is kind of part of your reward almost, where that's a key offering people are now looking for. So yeah, it's one of the key things why people leave, and one of the key things why people will also join your organization. So it's definitely a key trend that people are seeing. So yeah, spot on, Richard.
So some of the other challenges, diversity issues, absolutely. But interestingly, on diversity, We're also seeing that people with accessibility requirements have found that working remotely is actually even the playing field for them a little bit. So on a positive side, they don't have to commute into the office, or they might not have the energy to work a full working day, so they're able to work towards their energy levels. So that was just one of the positives that we had seen from remote work, and that flexible work environment actually enables them to return, if they haven't been working, to return to working, I suppose, a working week in a more suitable, or to suit their own needs. So that's just a benefit that did come through.
Yeah, one of the challenges is where we'll have half in the office and half remote. You know, do we all talk to the phone, or and then the conversation's biased to the remote person, or do we all ignore the phone? You know, if you say it's a level playing field when we're all remote, but when we have this, everybody on this meeting ticked hybrid, that's going to be a real challenge, I think, you know.
Absolutely. And one of the really interesting kind of tips that I'd seen is when we do get back to having, say, half people in a meeting room and half the people virtual, is almost like adopt a virtual person. So everyone on site is given, you're paired up with somebody who is remote, and it's your job to make sure that their voice is heard. It's your job to advocate for them, and that it creates that connection. It's not ideal, and obviously it will be easier, or it is easier when everyone's either on the virtual or they're in person. But this is kind of a way of making sure that voices don't get lost, because you don't want, I've definitely been that person where you dial in and you're just ignored, and it's a terrible feeling. You just kind of, it's not something that people want to experience. It's something that we want to create for our staff.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, there's an article recently that was published just around that question on who are we biased towards. Do we all go virtual, or do we all go kind of for the physical side? And the perspective in that article was virtual first. So if one's virtual, everyone's virtual almost, or you all kind of adopt that way of working. So that's one extreme view of how to handle it. But as Laura mentioned, there's a couple of different ways of which adopting a virtual person is really cool, and seems to be something that can work really well.
And it's just going to be one of those things that you're going to have to trial, and there'll be meetings where it doesn't work well, and we need to just take those learnings forward. So the balance, absolutely. Building a culture, absolutely. Monday to Friday might not be flexible enough, and building utilization will be a factor. Absolutely. So what we're seeing, there was that Apple, there's an article about Apple and saying where basically the employees weren't happy with the fact that they had designated remote days. And they're saying that, or my understanding of it is that people want to be able to pick, or at least have the option to influence what days are remote versus what days are on site. So if you are going with that flexible model, is it truly flexible, or is it days on site versus days off site, and that's set? So that's just another thing to talk through with staff and figure out what works. Does it all work for the team? And professional services might be different to a different type of organization too.
And it's important to choose what's right for your organization as well. I know we are trying to solve the problem for all our employees, but there's certain things that just can't be done in a hybrid setting or in a virtual setting, where you will have to have people on site. And it's having those conversations, consulting with those people, and having bold discussions, and not kind of just throwing communication into the air and hoping people will stick to that. It's having those difficult conversations. And a key element of that is empowering your managers and empowering your leaders to have those type of conversations and know how to deal with that as well. It's really kind of a very tricky situation for everyone to be in, because it will bring a lot of conflict as well.
And just another interesting one that came up there is the performance recognition challenges. So how are you defining what productivity is? And I know Elspie will touch on this later, but people coming into the office to kind of network and collaborate versus people at home doing kind of your deep thought. Like personally, I don't want to commute into the office to sit and do emails all day. Like when I'm in the office, I want to make sure that getting coffees with my colleagues, I'm networking, I'm doing like in-person coaching. I make sure that I'm cultivating those relationships. But that means that my productivity on those days, my output is actually lower. But I need that balance. So it's making sure that productivity isn't slowly, like, we have productivity from the office versus productivity at home, and what are the needs again that need to be worked out through that.
And is that the shift you're seeing, where the office is becoming more of a collaboration hub versus a place to actually do day-to-day work?
That seems to be the big trend at the moment. And say for the likes of Salesforce would have announced that they want to adapt a lot of their working space from rows and rows of desks to kind of collaboration zones. So kind of flexible areas that can be adapted to the size of the people involved. Or like if it's a small meeting room versus a meeting room for 20 people, can you put in movable walls so that the space can either grow or adjust based on the needs?
They're looking at also creating space for focused work outside of the office. So where you'll have co-working spaces that does not necessarily belong to your real estate, and where people can go and work and do that deep type of work. But when they come into the office, it's really to network, collaborate, and do workshops or learning type activities. See, there's a question or something coming through on the chat. Just want to quickly see what it says. And now I can't see it for some reason.
So for the office to work as a collaboration area, do you need to orchestrate the teams and squads that the officer that work together in the office on the same day rather than leave it for individuals to decide? I think that's down to, it will be down to the organization. But yes, they're like, hybrid does need to be, there needs to be some thought behind hybrid. It can't just happen naturally. I think there might need to be some sort of, on this day, this team have team meetings so people can kind of plan around that. So there
Yeah,
I
I popped that question in. I work for Verizon Connect, and we're adopting hybrid, right? And we ran retros and we ran internal surveys in our kind of Dublin and European offices. There's a corporate direction that we're moving towards hybrid, but we were trying to work out what works best. And all of the themes that you've hit on and the items that people have popped up here came up, right? Which was, people don't want to be in the office just for the presentism, right? You know, like, I'm in the office 2 days a week just to make sure everybody sees I'm in the office 2 days a week. They really wanted to work out what those activities were that made more sense to do when we're all together versus those things that we can do at home. And we initially anyway are starting with the idea that what that requires is probably that the teams that work together, they pick a day that they're in the office together. Even though we're flexible and you can come into the office any day of the week or all the days of the week if you wish, you as a team need to be in the office together 1 day a week, you know, with the normal flexibility for life, right?
Yeah.
And we felt that would allow us to address the idea of, you know, collaboration versus presentism, and then, you know, people being able to pick what they wanted. Because we just didn't know how we would ensure that, you know, I have a team of 5 people, they weren't all in on different days, then what's the point in being in the office at all?
Absolutely. And that's something similar to what we have now, actually, with our own personal team, is that there's just 2 days that if people are going into the office, if they choose to go into the office, there's normally people around on these 2 days, and you can kind of structure your week. Again, it's completely up to, like, it's individual choice at the moment, but you know that there's going to be people there to make sure that you're doing your networking, to get those kind of key time for having conversations and building that social element too.
Okay.
One interesting thing on culture is, and this is from Verizon's perspective as well, we might get some surprises, is that what Juma was talking about there, one team, actually the New Zealand group, have chosen Friday as the day to come in, which was really surprising. You thought it'd be the most hated day to come in.
Yeah.
Why? Why? Because they want to go and have a few pints and hang out after work. And the large number just this week have said, actually, we've all talked about it. We've done workshops and we want to do Friday because we really miss one another. And so I think if we can get the balance of that plus the innovation, which I think Apple were very brave to go out early on, that would be great. Because I guarantee you all of this will change on a dime.
Absolutely.
Once the bottom line starts getting hit. And as Tim Cook said, the innovation and ideas pipeline is drying up.
And you need people to be able to bounce ideas off each other in order to keep that up. But what we are seeing is that organizations are changing almost on a weekly basis. We're seeing announcements come out and then like weeks later, they're changing or they're adapting. So the market is changing day on day at the moment. And I think it will do for the next couple of months because this needs to bed in and people need to figure out from their point of view what works for them. And like even down to like seasonally, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like it's great having this conversation now, but November in Ireland, when you're talking about, okay, you could either work from home versus you can go into the office where people may or may not be there. We'll see changes again. So it's interesting to see how different aspects will impact people's behaviors.
What about, with COVID, you're able to decentralize your workforce. No longer did you need to have people centralized in one city. So really, you're able to find talent across a country, a region, or the globe. How does that factor in with, with companies wanting to shift back to a hybrid work model, but that may not necessarily work if you have people scattered around?
Absolutely. So if you take Bank of Ireland as an example, so they announced that they're actually going with a remote working hub model. So I think by the end of this year, they plan on having 22 remote working hubs all across Ireland, and then that they're going to repurpose their main office spaces for collaboration. So it's on that you can go in. So it's up to employees on if they need to come into the main office, they can, but if they choose to go to a remote area hub, they can. So it will be difficult to make sure that you're getting the regular teams coming together. Like that will add a layer of complexity, but I think it's more about bringing people, at least by having the hubs there, that there'll be some level of connection and some level of face-to-face engagement.
And maybe just to add on to that, I think actually a lot of the questions or the observations that you're bringing up will be covered now in the next section. So maybe let's run through that and then we can have a further discussion on these topics if that's okay with everyone. So let me just get back to the presentation slide. That was our discussion. There we go. So yeah, very interesting things coming out of that certainly. And I think we are definitely still in the space that all of you are in. We are still learning, and these sessions are in particularly very interesting for us because we're learning a lot from stories that's been shared already from you and from the other people we have been speaking to. And the topic I'm going to cover is specific on collaboration, which a lot of you have mentioned as a challenge for you. And in a way, it's also linked to the previous topic of culture and belonging, because you can't really get that culture and belonging right if you don't know how to collaborate with people who might not be physically present. So collaboration has really been on everyone's mind over the last year, and especially over the past few months with people returning to the office. On the onset of the pandemic, with the large-scale remote working being introduced, we really found ourselves rethinking how do we collaborate in this environment, and the gap was mostly filled by technology. Now that people are returning to office, we are quickly realizing that solving the remote working situation does not solve the hybrid one, combining physical and virtual work as its own unique challenges that we now are only seeing once people start returning to the office. And that's really raised two key questions from the clients that we are seeing. And the first one is, how do we collaborate with people who are in the office and other people who are not? And the second one is, what are the tools that we can use to enable this? So collaboration definitely is something that we want to continue. There's research that shows that it increases performance and innovation. And that really explains why collaboration activities has increased so much over the past few years. And technology companies have really jumped onto this bandwagon with the pandemic, with over 100 new tools being introduced specifically for this purpose in the market just in the first 8 months of 2020. But even with all of these tools around and people using it, there's still individuals who feel isolated and disconnected while working from home. And we kind of see this trend continuing with hybrid work if we don't crack the conundrum of how to collaborate effectively across this, this new way of working. So if you do a Google search today, you'll probably find loads of different ways of how people are trying to make this work, ranging from how they adapt video conferencing to introducing VR and AI to simulate real working situations. I'm just going to share 2 examples with you. So the first one is Emerson. So Emerson, as part of their culture, they have a creative collaboration culture, and they follow a human-centric design approach to problem solving. So they actually have a dedicated team who looks after this called the Human-Centered Design Institute, who used to hold workshops and trainings with people to help them to adapt to this model and to use it in work. So even before the pandemic, they were struggling with how do we do these workshops and trainings when people are placed all over the world, which I know was one of the questions that came up in the discussion already. And they turned to a tool called Mural, which I'm sure some of you might have come across already. And really, Mural is a nice tool to emulate a workspace where you can use whiteboarding and sticky notes similar that you will in a workshop setting to create that type of collaboration and sharing of ideas and brainstorming. And what they saw within their organization is using it in this one setting, which was so driven by their culture, created a situation where Mural was adopted in other sectors as well. So they used it to collaborate on their normal work tasks and even in team building sessions. So this is really a great example to see how you can continue your collaboration culture, even with a dispersed team. Another example is Fujitsu. So they're one of the players in the market providing some of these tools to others. And they introduced a concept called work-life shift. So this really, the aim behind this was to have a boundaryless office where people can work flexibly around hybrid and remote working. And they looked at it from different perspectives. So the one was creating a cloud-based workspace where people can use new ways of communication and working styles to work together on tasks. The other one was from a security perspective, which we are also seeing as a very big trend currently. People are really concerned with everyone working from home or maybe a coffee shop or co-working space. How do we protect the security of information? So they introduced a tool called Zero Trust, which they've only launched in Japan so far, but it's really focused on how do you manage that when people work from anywhere. And then the last one, which is really interesting, is they've brought in a virtual collaboration space. So this is a space where people can come together, being different users working on various types of content, whether it's videos, whether it's CAD files, or even just your simple documents that you use in your daily life, but everyone can input and work on it simultaneously, which really helps for that collaboration and productivity that you've been missing in the workspace. And then they're also using workforce analytics to visualize working styles and really get an understanding of how people are working together. And this is a valuable tool for them to continuously improve new ways of working. So they're really playing in this market, but they've also piloted it in their own team, which is a great example of walking the talk. But there's a lot of technology solutions out there, but I think there's a few things that needs to happen before we look at technology. So I'm just going to share a few kind of practical considerations that you need to keep in mind when considering hybrid work. So although collaboration is important, you shouldn't collaborate just for the sake of it. There are definitely tasks that's still more suited for individual focused work. If you're thinking of adopting a hybrid work model, which I know all of you are, it's best to consider what type of work is best suited for what setting. And one of you have alluded to that already in the discussion. So on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you'll see a model of things to consider on when to collaborate. So the two things to consider is team size and interaction required. So what we've seen is collaboration works better with smaller teams. So 3 to 8 people, it's much more effective to collaborate when you have a small team like that, rather than having a big team of 25 people coming into a virtual or an in-person session. We've all been on a call where you don't get a chance to speak or provide your input because there's so many people on the call. What we've also seen is collaboration works best when you really require a lot of people's input or different people's input, and you've got clear objectives and a real focus on specifically what you need to deliver. The worst thing, or the thing that really counters collaboration, is if you have a lot of people in one room trying to work together on something that could easily have been done by someone in a focus setting, and you didn't really need all that input. So the first step to get collaboration right is to select the tasks that require it and to get the best team on it. But then you also need to consider, where do they then do this work? And that's the critical challenge that we're facing with hybrid working. So research has shown that interpersonal work like problem solving, learning, onboarding, facilitation, networking, that all is best suited for face-to-face work. And obviously that's the easiest when you do it in the office. When it comes to deep focused work or big meetings like a town hall, it's better to do that in a virtual space. You save money, you save time, and you have people really focusing on their work when it comes to that individual work. We all may have seen stats of people saying, I'm so much more productive while working from home. And that is probably because they're taken out of a setting where people are consistently coming up to them, asking questions, distracting them from getting the job done. But this is all kind of easy to say, do this at home, do this at the office, if the spaces are not set up to facilitate this. So we've already mentioned that people are looking at or re-looking at how they use the office. So in particular, having collaboration days versus work from home days, which is then aimed at individual work. So really what we are seeing is people are completely rethinking how they use the office. When you come into the office, you are simply there to collaborate, to innovate, or to connect to people. And that's probably why people like coming in on a Friday, as you said, to go for that drink. But the rest of the time they work from home, and they actually get the similar amount of work done that they would have previously when they were in the office, because they are so focused on the work that they are doing. But to enable that collaboration in the office, you need to rethink how you actually design that space as well. What we are seeing are people are creating spaces that are particularly for interaction and collaboration, where people can walk around, stick up notes, and really interact with the content so that they can come up with new ideas and solve problems. But you also need to think of the people who can't be there physically. You will, in the new world of work where people might be working from a global setting or where their personal circumstances don't allow them to come in, you will be faced with some people at home or elsewhere and some people in the office. And some organizations are purposefully looking at how they create that hybrid collaboration spaces. Google has recently introduced a new meeting room called Campfire, where Googlers can sit in a circle with huge screens representing individuals that are physically not there, so that they can feel like they are actually physically present in that situation. So people are really starting to think smartly about how they do this. But finally, the other thing that people need to think about is privacy. So we've experienced this firsthand with a number of people starting to go into the office. So people are still doing their remote work, but in the office. So we are all on calls all day interacting with people. But you can clearly hear the people around you if you're sitting in the office, but even worse for the person who's working remotely, you can hear full conversations through the headset of the person that you're talking to. This raises a key issue in terms of privacy and also confidentiality of information. So organizations are now looking at technology or dividers or privacy areas within the office, even for individuals who have to go onto virtual meetings. Privacy is also a concern for people outside of the office if they're working in coffee shops or co-worker locations. It's always important to think of how do we create a space where privacy can be upheld and sensitive information is not divulged to people who shouldn't know it. So really what we found is there's so many complicated issues that comes with hybrid working. And to solve that, you really need a multidisciplinary team that can think of anything from, will my employee be happy, to do I have the technology I need? Have I designed the right space? And then also look at cultural elements of, are we doing it the right way as well? So before we go into another discussion, I just want to bring us back a little bit to the technology discussion that started with the 2 case study examples that I mentioned previously. So in a situation where we'll always have someone not physically present, technology is your way to include those people. What we've shown on this slide is a few examples of tools that you can use in different situations. And with more than 100 tools going around in the market, it's always important to select the right ones for your situation. I think all of us have used video conferencing or ideation and whiteboarding at least to some extent. And they've really helped us in a virtual environment to hold those meetings that we need to have, even do a bit of social interaction and do that brainstorming and problem solving through the use of whiteboards. We also see organizations using virtual office, using enterprise collaboration tools and task management tools, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, to facilitate some of those normal connections. We specifically use Yammer as well, and it's a nice tool to share content with people that are not physically with you, or to ask people across the globe to share something with you. So that has been around even before the pandemic. And then if you look at task management, with productivity being such a key priority for a lot of organization, it's great to have tools around that can manage tasks and even track productivity as you go ahead. But there's also a number of new tools entering the market, and they are really interesting. And the purpose of them is really to emulate the working world in a virtual situation. So if you look at virtual offices, what they do is literally what it says. They have rooms online which you can physically see. People are in there busy interacting. You can close or open your door to let people know that they can come in or to chat with you or not. You can join a water cooler discussion, and you can set up virtual hours where people can come and consult with you. So that's a real cool intervention that these companies are working on. And some organizations are taking it a step further. Even if you look at places like Arthur and Spatial, they are creating avatars and virtual reality tools where you can physically be present in a meeting as your avatar, which is based on a selfie of yourself. So it's really freaky actually to see yourself in that meeting, but you can physically interact with people and by touch participate by writing things on boards and using 3D objects in the room. So there's some very advanced tools coming into the market as well. But we're not all ready for avatars. So while we have some of the tools we already have, we also have a few tips that you can use. So we've already kind of come across this in the virtual setting, that timing is everything. So in a virtual setting, you can only keep the attention of someone for up to 2 to 3 hours, they've said in research. And you also need to think, if someone is virtual, they're probably jumping from one meeting to the next without any break in between. So at Deloitte, we've adopted 25-minute and 55-minute meetings to help those people also get a break in between those sessions. The other one is think virtual first. So as Laura already mentioned, adopting a virtual person is a really great way to help them feel included. But we also need to not discriminate against people who have technical issues and make sure that they still feel included and have that opportunity to speak, even if it does waste a little bit of time. Engage, engage, engage. So research actually shows that you have to engage virtual people every 5 to 7 minutes, which is a bit extreme, but we tried every 15 minutes to introduce a poll or get the attention of someone to contribute. And then the last two is you as a leader play a big part in instilling some of these norms in your people. If you are the one reading emails while someone's talking, everyone will follow suit. So you have to be present and make sure you engage with everyone within that hybrid meeting. And evolve. None of us have cracked this yet. It is a difficult situation. So keep asking for feedback and make plans to see how you can evolve your hybrid way of working until it really suits you and your team. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the collaboration session. We again just have a quick poll, and then feel free to ask a few more questions and share some experiences. So I'm just going to go back to Menti.
Elsie, maybe just when you're introducing the poll, there's an interesting comment from Mark there in the chat box, just referring to those distractions in the physical office, which are the ad hoc collaboration moments that are lost, I suppose, in the virtual environment. And while productivity increases are gained from the homework, there's somewhat of a trade-off then with the lost ad hoc collaborations.
Absolutely. I mean, there's also, yeah, there's distractions in both areas. I think the distraction in the office is you really use that for your opportunity to connect with people, and you're distracted from your productive in-person work. Whereas at home, you get distracted by everything else around you, and it's very easy on a virtual call to be on your phone or to read something in the background while people are working. So getting that balance right is key, which is why when you design your ways of working, where you do what and what those norms are is really...
For me, what's top of mind is the newbies. You know, we've a lot of newbies in our company, obviously since March 10th last year. You know, I'm sure you're all the same, right? I mean, it's how those people, how do they get those informal kind of tips and tricks, and like we can create all the virtual training in the world. It's a tricky one. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just something we have to deal with.
Yeah,
particularly for newbies.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many additional challenges around new people as well. How do you onboard them? Just from a culture perspective, that's a real challenge especially if they're going to be working remotely for the time being. We've been finding it really difficult. And it's really leading by example and showing them what it is they're supposed to be doing in these settings. That's helped a lot. We also had some really bad examples of people not leading by example, but it certainly is a tricky situation. If you are trying to complete the poll, you might be stuck on an old question. So just then say, go to slide. It should take you to the new one. People feeling left out currently being the top one, definitely something that we are seeing as well. Productivity as well.
When we did, just to Mark's point, when we did some surveys and retros in the office, we found that people's perception of how effective the working from home had been varied by role. Whereas like we're software development companies, so the developers loved it, right? They're at home, nobody distracts them, they can just head down, go for it. People who are trying to understand what's going on or get the bigger picture of what's going on or manage or whatever, found it more difficult, right? Because we used to do a lot of managing by walking around, right? We had physical boards, we had ways of seeing how work was happening, which all vanished overnight, right? So, and it's taken us a while to work out how to get back to that point, without tapping someone on the shoulder every 5 minutes. What are you doing now? What are you doing now? So that has been difficult, right? And the developers go, anyone who asks me any question at any time, it's a distraction. And then the people who are asking the question are like, well, we need to understand what's going on, or we have this problem over here, or we need to bring the new guy up to speed, or et cetera, et cetera. So I think different people have different perceptions of it, right?
Absolutely. And one way of that we've been looking at solving that is through personas. So similar that you would do user personas in the technology environment for user experience, we are doing the same for people and trying to see what are the things that they need, that frustrates them and that enables them. So that has really been helpful to map out what that type of individual needs. And we've seen a couple of things that varies in terms of what's important to people. So one is type of work that you've just mentioned. Other things are personal circumstances, so caring duties, etc. Some people find it difficult to leave their pets at home, which is really interesting, and don't know how to do that now after spending 18 months with them. So there's things you've never thought about, but when you go through workshops where you really ask people, what is it that you need, what really frustrates you, and what are you so afraid of with going back to the office, it really informs you and helps you to get some of those tailored initiatives going.
Okay.
So it looks like the one that's coming out on top is people feeling left out. So yeah, some of the definitely say this is a key trend that we're seeing, and it's going to continue. As we've mentioned, the research says people feeling isolated and left out is one of the key issues that we've seen over the past year, and it's just going to be amplified through hybrid working. What we've done with new people is introduced buddies that kind of takes them through the ropes, but that doesn't need to stop with new people. You can also continue that further into their working journey so that they always have someone to interact with. I know in one of our teams, we also have specific people that rotate that you need to follow up with on a weekly basis. So you would have that person for, say, 4 weeks, and then you move on to a next person. That also helps facilitate that idea where you used to be able to meet new people in the office, but now you might not even know this person is working for your team because you never interact with them. So you have to kind of artificially build that social capital, which you haven't been, that happened naturally previously.
And what we are seeing as well is almost like doing a coffee lottery where everyone's names go into a hat and you are paired up with somebody in your department, somebody who you wouldn't normally interact with, ideally, and then that changes every 2 weeks. And we've got 2 weeks to meet this person and just have a catch up, but it has to be orchestrated. Yeah, and I suppose that's the downside of hybrid, is you do lose out on those ad hoc, natural interactions.
Absolutely. We've even Friday drinks, we've done virtual versions of that. There's a countdown game that you can play online, which seems to have been the top one for running these sessions. So it's always a quiz or some game, but you really get interaction and laughs, which you would have had in the office, but it only brings you that far. So if you have the opportunity to meet in person, use those days that you have office days really productively, and don't force people to be sitting at their desks delivering individual work, where you can use that time to collaborate and network, to be honest. Yeah. Great. Any other comments? I know, Victoria, we're getting to the end of the session, so I mean, really great discussion. There's just one thing we want to leave you with before we wrap. So if I can just go back to this. So this is a very simple tool that you can use. As I said, we're all still struggling to figure this out, and having a hybrid team charter is one way of doing it. You don't have to call it that, and you don't have to use it in this format, but even if you have it in the background, to ask the questions, to share the learning, and to commit to specific behaviors and rituals that you want in your meetings or in your working with each other, really helps you to start forming that for your team and for your organization. And what we have found is it may look different from your team to another, but as long as you can find that rhythm that works for you, you can learn and evolve as you go along. So Victoria will be sharing the slides, so you can have this in your back pocket if you need it. Great. Thanks, Victoria. I'll hand over to you then.
Thank you, Elsie, and thank you, Laura. Loads of insights shared there, a huge amount of ground covered as well, and really interesting feedback and comments, I think, from clients too. I think it demonstrates as well, as you say, there's no playbook here. We're on new ground, and I think it might be interesting to reconnect, let's say in maybe 3 or 6 months when we are back fully operational in this hybrid model, to see maybe what's working, what's not, and share some thoughts and ideas at that point. Thank you. We will follow up and share the recording and the slides. I know you've kindly included as well, Laura and Elspie, your contact details in the event that clients want to reach out directly. Please do feel free also to connect with your own project executives on the IDA side. Thank you for taking the time today to join us. I hope you found it useful. And thanks as well to my colleague Shane for opening up the session. We hope to see you again soon. Have a good day, and thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Really good.
Thanks,
Thanks,
folks.
folks. Take care,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.